Hey everybody, I'm Tommy. Today I'm going to show you how I made this super simple clamp rack that will hold just about any F-style clamp you have. Whether it's your first time here or even if you've been here before, welcome to 1 Minute Workbench. So I have a pretty eclectic set of clamps, and if you're anything like me, you probably have an eclectic set of clamps as well. I didn't go out and buy a matching set where all the sizes were the exact same clamp. So a lot of the designs for clamp racks that are specific to one style of clamp won't work for me. So the really cool thing about this clamp rack is not only is it ridiculously simple to make, but it actually makes really efficient use of space for just about any F style of clamp you have. I started by laying out all of my clamps and measuring them to see how much space they were going to require. I measured each style individually to see the maximum amount of space an individual clamp would take up. Some people suggest that you can save space by organizing clamps by length and then stacking them in cubbies. According to my measurements, however, that would only be true if you pass a certain threshold. Otherwise, arranging the clamps single file actually results in more efficient use of space. That said, I arranged the clamps single file and took a measurement of the overall size of the group. With that measurement in mind, I started looking around my shop trying to find a spot where the clamps would fit. The back corner of my garage has been collecting odds and ends that should probably be somewhere else. So I did a little spring cleaning and then measured the area. And it looked like it was going to work out just fine. I originally thought I might have to create individual slots for each clamp, so this first prototype was an attempt at creating notches that would accommodate some of my bar clamps. The problem with this design was that it didn't allow the bar portion of the clamps to hang straight up and down. Instead, the bars were all at an angle, and any attempt to straighten out the bars would cause the arrangement to be even more likely to fall. Of course, the other problem with this design is that it doesn't accommodate every single style of clamp. So I started thinking about more universal concepts. Using a piece of conduit turned out to be okay, but the clamps tended to swivel around a bit and seemed like they might be prone to slipping off more easily. Then I tried just hanging them from a flat surface, in this case, my workbench. This also worked okay, but I noticed the pad on the top jaw made contact with the flat surface first. This obviously caused the clamps to hang tilted back at an angle, again, making them more likely to fall. So my next idea was just to use a strip of plywood. It has the same benefits as using the piece of tubing in that the pad on the top jaw can't hit anything. This means that the clamps can hang straight up and down. And like the flat surface of the workbench top, it provides more surface area and more friction than the tubing. This means the clamps will be more likely to stay put and won't swivel around as easily. This seemed like a winner to me, so I started building the rack. I cut one strip of plywood at 3 inches and another at 3.5 inches. I also cut some small pieces at 2.5 inches by 3 inches. This will make sense in just a little bit. I made some marks to help me arrange the spacing of the smaller pieces. To assemble the clamp rack, I basically just connected the 2 longer strips of plywood together, using the 4 smaller pieces to create space between them. I added glue to the pieces and then pin nailed them in place just to temporarily hold everything together. So I didn't have to use clamps and wait for glue to dry, I used screws. For every screw I used, I drilled a pilot hole and a countersink. From the end, you can see that having the front portion of the clamp rack taller than the back portion makes it so the pad on the top jaw doesn't hit anything, and that allows the clamps to hang straight up and down. You can also see that the clamp rack is deep enough so that once it's wall mounted, there will be just enough room for the clamps to hang without hitting the wall. I used the longest clamp I have to determine the height for the clamp rack and then started checking for studs with a magnet. There are obviously studs in the corners, but I felt like I should have a contact point in the middle as well. Using a magnet is my favorite method for finding a 2x4. Using this narrow magnet allowed me to more precisely determine the location of a drywall screw. After marking a couple of drywall screw locations, I used a level to help me determine the line that would most likely be the center of the stud. With my marks determined, I set out to hang the clamp rack. I drilled pilot holes and added a couple of screws. I then realized the screws I had chosen were a little too short, so I grabbed some longer screws. I used the longer screws to replace the first two I had added, and then added the rest. Again, for every screw I added, I drilled a pilot hole to help prevent splitting the wood. In total, I used 6 of the long screws, 2 for each stud. And that was pretty much it, so I added all of my clamps to the rack. The clamp rack is exactly 30.5 inches wide, and I just happened to have exactly 30 F-style clamps, and luckily, they all fit on the rack. This means, at least for my collection of clamps, I'm averaging just slightly over an inch of wall space for each clamp. So building a clamp rack without any specific notches or cubbies really makes it an easy build. It also means that it'll hold just about any clamp and uses only a minimal amount of wall space while doing it. Hey, thanks for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you haven't already, be sure to like and subscribe, and make sure you hit the bell icon so you get notified every time there's a new episode. I'd love to hear what you think of this super simple clamp rack in the comments section below. And if you have any quick questions you want answered, hit me up on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter. And until the next time I see you, I hope you have fun building something.